Hi, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of Kassick's Corner, a podcast for teachers, educators, anyone in the field of education, genuinely, in a way that we can just, come to this, comfy little corner of the internet and talk about all the things that are happening in our lives and in the lives of education. And right now, we're doing our best. We're in the middle of summer. We're doing the best we can to, be ready for next year, right? So I promised myself that I would try to do something this year as my platform grows a little bit. And I say grows very very lightly in the sense of I am still very relatively small compared to where I eventually want to be and where other people are in general. So I think what I'm working on right now is I'm about to use this recording and I'm going to go live on my TikTok. So what we'll see in this, right? I'm just gonna start yapping about some ideas, but I'm hoping to engage with the audience a little bit. And then once I'm live, hopefully it won't distract the podcast listeners too much, those loyal of you that are still sticking around. But the idea here is that I want to engage and interact with the community in a different way. So the best way that I know how to do that, right? And I'm gonna talk about some of my ideas here in a second that I have. But the main ideas that I have with this is literally just creating a space online, like I said, like a little corner of the internet where all these people can kind of come together to talk about education. Yeah. So in order to do that, I feel like there has to be some effort in combining the community somewhere, right? So in my head, where do we go to get information? We go, a lot of us are going on the internet. So I figured hey, if you're scrolling through TikTok and happen to fall upon this, then great. And I think I'm going to talk about this more in a second as well, but it's this idea of I really want to create opportunities for teachers to have professional development that is accessible to them. And I've gone to a lot of, webinars and things like that where teachers are engaging online and I felt has anyone ever done that on TikTok, right? So I'm going to try something out and we're going to see how it goes. I didn't really prep for this. I didn't advertise this. So if there's one or two viewers in my live, then that's a win for me. I might just be talking to myself like I usually do when I record podcasts. So this is my intro. I haven't started it yet. I will definitely let you guys know when that moment happens so you can be oh, that's when he started recording live. So I'm going to, pause here in a second and I'll let you know when I come back for the live. And with that, also keep in mind that I'm going to try my best to interact with people that do show up. So if I, have awkward pauses or things, this episode might just feel a little different editing wise, but y'all know that I'm already all over the board anyway, so it won't come off that weird. But know that if I'm addressing a question, I'll make sure to try my best to make sure that that's a question from the people I'm interacting with, because I'm not just flying by the seat of my pants this time. Hopefully there will be some guiding questions in there that can kind of get us into something a little bit more substantial than me just yapping. So I'll pause right here and then when I come back I'll be live. Okay, and we are embarrassingly live, and I don't want to talk about how long it took me to push the actual button because it was just something I'm trying, right? So as we are, looking at what I wanted to talk about today, it kind of starts with a little bit of a story, okay? Because for a long time I've been wanting to create some sort of platform in which teachers can communicate, right? So with this podcast, that's a good place to start. So when I'm recording it today, the idea is that I have some plans, right? But I think in order to actually create the audience that I want to, I think there's a limit that you have to take, right? Where when we are kind of doing these things, it's you have to take the risk to put yourself out there. And I think that's the most, for lack of better words, it's an embarrassing little part. And it is nerve-wracking, right? So what I thought about doing today, right? I posted a video the other day. I think it was yesterday actually. And as I'm thinking about getting ready for school and doing my best to enjoy summer, the idea of when we go back, we all have that dreaded session of we have to sit in meetings for a week and a half before kids actually come, before the good part actually comes, right? So I think when I'm talking about what I want to do here and on the internet and as a content creator is the idea of creating opportunities for teachers to have PDs, right? To get them to learn to create a little sense where we can actually engage, because I've been to a lot of professional developments online, and a lot of that works in the way that it's okay, we just kind of log in and we kind of do whatever we need to do and then we get off. So I'm okay, why can't we do that here, right? So the idea is when we're planning some of these things, that's kind of what the video I posted about yesterday was. So the video I posted was kind of just asking people, right? And I obviously didn't ask everyone in the whole country, the whole like teaching community, right? Because that would be impossible. But what I did do is I created an opportunity for teachers to say like, hey, like if you had a say in it, what would you be able to, what would you want it to be about, right? So I kind of have a list in here of like some of those things because the idea is as I'm going through this, and I really want to, like I said, like actually develop some of these things later. So a lot of the things that are in here are from like teachers that are saying like, oh, here's what we need more help with. Here's the things that we need, right? So as I'm kind of going through this, I'll talk a little bit about the ones that I have a little bit more to say about. But basically, the idea here is I'm just going to like yap about some of their ideas and then hopefully, something will stick. And I think that that's the goal here, right? So while I'm, here and looking for people to like engage in some way, I think the idea here more is just like starting a conversation, right? So in that video, what I did is I like posted a lot of um, questions for people that just like say, hey, like what do you want to learn about? And I think like the overarching, and I have some notes here for once, which is crazy. So I think like what people really started to recognize is that like when teachers are going back to school, they don't want to be like bombarded with all of the stuff that feels like super useless to them. The idea is that like teachers thematically across the board, right? I think like the biggest thing that teachers wanted when I made that post was they definitely wanted just like time, right? And I think like if you're a teacher who's going back to school and you're getting ready and you have all these different things to say and do and like work on and plan with, right? The idea is like we don't want to sit in an hour and a half long meeting. We don't want to sit in 4 hours of meetings in the morning. Like we want to just like jump right in, right? So I think like as we're talking about what teachers really want from PD is like what they actually want is like time, right? And I think what that equates to is like yes, we all know that we want time, but we also want like our professional developments to like actually mean something, right? Like at the end of the day, it's not really about hey, like this PD is a waste of time in general. I think the idea is we want the PDs to be good, and I think that as they get better, teachers will like appreciate them more. But it's like right now they all kind of suck, right? Like we can all kind of agree that that's the case. So is one of the things that came up on that video, and it's on my TikTok that a lot of these teachers are just like commenting about like the things that they actually wish that they had, and that biggest thing is time, right? Like, and I think the biggest thing is it's not always just like time to work in their classrooms on their own to get prepared. I also think it is just time to work with the people that they get to work with, right? And I think like that's a huge piece because the most meaningful PDs that I've been to have always been ones that like provide a space for me to like not only just like, engage in the material, but also engage with like other professionals and engage with like the people that I want. Like my worst nightmare though, like if I'm sitting in like a building wide or a district wide PD, the idea that like, oh, like go sit with somebody you've never sit before, like that's awful. Like whoever's doing that is like actually like please stop doing that because that immediately puts something, at least for me, and like I'm not going to be the one that like says for everyone like this is an issue, but for me personally, like I don't want to sit next to strangers. I want to sit next to people that like actually matter to me in my job and that I actually enjoy being around. So I think like as we're talking in professional developments, I think the idea here is that it's like give us time, but like also give us like the freedom to do things that are comfortable for us, right? So I think like as I start like planning what this looks like for me in the future and what this looks like for me like in a few months when we all go back is the idea of how do we advocate for classroom time, right? And I don't have like a perfect answer to that. And I think the best answer is really just like finding in your building the, and I don't know like how this works because I've never like been one, but there are department heads that like exist, right? And I think our avenue to work through these issues that we have is like that's our first person we need to go to, right? Is we need to go to the people that like can actually do something about it because like low key I'm just a teacher. Like there's not a whole lot that I can do to sway like districts or administration in that way. But if teachers want time, I think they have to be able to ask for it. And I know that not everyone has that opportunity or has admin that are willing to listen. But based on like what I've heard from teachers and based on like what I've created and kind of understood and like been in the platform for or been in the profession for, the idea is like we just want like time, right? And going from there, I think like we also need time just to like sit and be with the people that we're going to work with, okay? Because when we're asked to sit in a 5 hour meeting, like we don't get time to talk to the teachers about talk to our fellow teachers, like grade level teams, content teams about things. And I think like if I learned anything from the video that I just posted about like teachers saying like what they needed. I think like the thing that they need the most is just like communication, right? Like they need to be able to talk to each other in the way that provides them opportunities to, exist and be better. Because the idea here is not that we're wasting time, but the idea is that we're like using time, right? So I don't know. I don't know what all of that is to say. I think there's a lot of like complaints that we can do about like teaching in general and like the time that we're given at the beginning of the year. But as I'm talking about like all those different things that teachers want is they just want time because that's something that they don't often get. And at the beginning of the year when we're all stressed about, what do our classes look like and like are these kids going to be good? And it's like we want just time to sit in it and be there as opposed to sitting, and listening to someone talk for 4 hours, which is like low key what I'm doing right now, but it doesn't matter because I didn't force you to be here. Right. So the other thing, and this is one that I can actually talk a little bit more about, and like the goal here, right? And like one of the big things that I want to do as a teacher is just like give opportunities to like share my knowledge and my experience because like obviously I'm not an expert. I haven't been teaching for as long as a lot of people, but I feel like I have a lot to offer in that capacity, right? So the part of like me asking in a recent video about like what teachers actually want is part of me is working to create like those opportunities because like I don't know if this is like a thing, but if I kind of talked about it at the beginning where I have logged on to just like sit in Zooms and online workshops with teachers. Like I did one earlier this summer and like they gave me a certificate and all of a sudden now I have like this hour professional development time that I can just like turn in for credit. Like that's crazy. And I didn't barely do anything. So it's like, okay, if this random company can do that, like why can't I do that? Like why can't I just do that on here? Right? And I can make a certificate, I can do all these different things and I think that that's what this next part of the conversation is, right? Like I'm not an expert in like how to logistically manage like the time piece of a professional development, but I am really good at managing like how I can share my knowledge in like special education because a question that just came in is like what do I teach? And I teach right now I'm in special education, right? So I have experience about working with paras. I think that was a big thing that came up in the video, like working with special education students, like working in co-teaching and writing IEPs and all those different things are super important. And I also have knowledge in like, teaching language arts. Like I taught language arts for the longest time. I have, I just recently graduated with my counseling degree. Like these are things that I like want to talk about and that I care about so much just in the sense of like these are the things that I want to do to make education better and I like want to share that, right? And I feel like I don't have to get approved by like like a district to do it. I can just like log on here and like start yapping into a microphone and all of a sudden it's recorded forever. So this podcast kind of is that, right? So I'm trying to like make those things more meaningful. And I was glad to see actually that this came up in the video that I posted. The video I posted very much was asking like what do you need more of right now in the sense of like since you have to sit in PDs anyway, like what is the thing that you want? And a lot of teachers were talking about just like special education in general. And the things that came across there is I have a list right here on my computer of like all the comments. I like scrolled through it for like 30 minutes trying to like respond and like take screenshots of all these things that I saw. So a lot of like the conversation in teaching, right, is just like every teacher like wants to be better and they're like asking for that, but a lot of the times the professional development that we get doesn't do that. So when we're talking about special education in general, I did think of this idea in how I want to do something for my own school and my own like, teachers down the line. And obviously I'm going to talk more about this. This is just like kind of like a trial run, like rant situation to see if like this live situation is like actually something that's sustainable for me or working. Podcast will obviously always be a thing. Like I'm recording it right now for a reason, right? But the whole point of like this is just like a brief little like trial run to see if this is actually something that I can like actively engage in and care about in a way that matters. So like I said, I keep getting distracted because I'm doing too many things at once, obviously. But there was a big conversation about like just teachers wanting and needing more guidance and like that working with like challenging students, right? And it wasn't even just like, oh, like there's so many big behaviors. Like it wasn't even really about that. It was really just about like how to exist in a space in a classroom with them as opposed to like putting things up against the wall and just like landing on nothing, right? And I think that working in special education has given me the capacity to like do some of those things. One of the biggest ones that I really appreciated actually in the comments of my recent video was like working with paras specifically. And even as a special education teacher last year, like, and last year was a like, very different story for me in general just because I was like doing grad school and all these different things all at once. But when I, last year I didn't like, I saw my para, but like I didn't see her like ever. Like there was never a chance for me to like sit down and actually, talk to her about like what classes looked like and what things looked like and how to address certain things. Like she would come to me, like we had a good enough relationship where like she could come to me and like talk through all these things. But there wasn't like a lot of there wasn't like a lot of time for us to like sit and plan, and there definitely wasn't time for her to sit and plan with like the language arts teacher she was pushing in with or the math teacher she was pushing in with, right? And I think like a professional development that like guides teachers in those relationships and like how to create those relationships, I think is a huge piece, right? And on that same capacity, it's like, what does co-teaching look like? Like I know at my school we push in and we do, I'm working with kids like that are on my caseload and I'm like pushing in and helping them in the best way that I can. But a lot of times like teachers don't know what that looks like, and I don't often have the time to like sit and do that. So like if I were to structure professional development, a lot of the things that I would want to do as as a special education teacher is like training and guidance in co-teaching and like what that looks like, right? And a lot of people, like I said in my comments, like a lot of people were talking about like what that looks like for them, because like they don't like, we don't get that, right? So one of the ideas that I had for this, and this is something that like I'm going to advocate for, like I said, I'm trying really hard next year to like, I don't know, I'm finally like feeling like I'm in a good space. And you can listen to all the other recordings that I've put on because like I don't have time to do it right now, but I'm finally feeling like in a space where I can exist in a way where I'm not like constantly under like this pressure or this anxiety to do it. Like I'm actually in a good place, like I'm in a supportive environment, like I'm in a good school, like I'm enjoying the work that I'm doing. So what I'm really going to try to do next year is kind of like create, I learned about this in my counseling program where it was like you have coffee with the counselor, and what the counselor does is they like, host, and is like all the families can come and like get pastries and coffee and all these different things right away, like on a Tuesday morning, right? Just like this fun little community event where teachers can host families and host the community and host all these different things. And that's something that I want to try, but not necessarily through the community lens, but through more of like the lens of my team and like what I can offer, right? Because I think like the hardest part to advocate for is giving teachers like time and space to exist in the best way that they can. And I think like if I provide an opportunity, I'm like, hey guys, like come and talk to me about your kids, it's like, right before school I'll bring like donuts and coffee and all these different things. And I think like that in and of itself is the best professional development that we can offer, because it is giving people time and space to like talk about the things that matter. And I think like that's largely what's missing in a lot of these things, where teachers aren't given a whole lot of time to exist around each other and like talk about things that matter. So if you are a special education teacher, if you're a teacher in general, I think one of the things to advocate for is literally just like creating time and space for yourself to have those conversations. So for me, like I said, and I will be, this is another random like side tangent, is I signed up to be on like I applied, I didn't sign up, I applied to be on like the leadership team for next year. And apparently that also means that like since I got on, I'm also like the head of the department. Like, hello, excuse me, like hello, what? I didn't sign up for that. But anyway, I'm excited to like do that in the sense of now I get to like advocate for these things in the way that I was talking about at the beginning, right? Like I suddenly am the person that gets to advocate for the things that we need. So as we're talking about professional development, a lot of it should be taking place throughout the year. It shouldn't just be like, hey, yeah, let's sit for 8 hours at the beginning of the year and just like, sit and listen to some person talk about the new initiatives or, how to use AI in the classroom, which I'll come back to in a second. And I don't know, that doesn't feel like useful to me in the same way that like professional developments do, because I feel like I said, like professional development should really exist in a place where it feels meaningful to teachers, and the best way to make it meaningful for teachers is to let them lead the way and enjoy that time, right? Because with my idea of like having this like special education like open house, we're kind of talking about how can I create a space that like welcomes these people and like gives us an opportunity to learn from each other and learn about our students and like help them in that way, right? So it's just one of those things that I just think about in the fact of like professional development shouldn't suck so much. Like we shouldn't hear those words and we shouldn't be like, oh damn, like I don't want to do that, right? Like we it shouldn't be like that. It should be a lot more of like, oh my god, yes, I finally have this like open house and I'm gonna go get a donut and I'm gonna talk to Mr. Kassick and I'm gonna to, exist in a space where I can actually make a difference there. So yeah, I don't know. I just like I'm trying my best to like make sure that that sort of thing is available for teachers, especially in my building, because I think a big it's a big thing that I think is lacking in this situation. So if you're just joining, hey, thank you so much. It's nice to see all of you guys. The you know as I'm recording this podcast, I'm like doing it live for the first time, so it's like kind of awkward. But I've already said that. But the idea here is like, hey, welcome in, come in. If you have a question, it's nice to see you guys here. Appreciate you being here. Gonna pause a little bit to scroll through some of this. Oh my god, does that mean I've made it? I felt like at the beginning I was gonna be all like, oh my god, just waiting for a few more people to join. Just, let me wait for some other people. So I'm not there yet. I just got the ability to like actually go live, so I'm trying really hard to like figure out if it's like for me or not. And so far it's like it's fine. Like I said, we don't have to talk about how long it took me to like build up the courage to like push that stupid little button, but here we are anyway. What was I talking about? I was talking about teaching. So, the in that video, I think like the other thing that I also really struggle with, and something that like other teachers really noticed, is this idea of like regulating and talking through issues with students, right? And I think like a huge thing about teaching in general is that every kid comes into your room nowadays, and this is, oh my god, another side tangent is crazy. I cannot keep my brain straight. But the idea of like we need to create spaces for students that like gives them an opportunity to like regulate, right? And I've taken a lot of professional developments about self-regulation, in the sense of like, okay, like I have my counseling degree and I have all these different things that are training to build up for this, but a lot of teachers like aren't given that. So if a kid comes into their room and all of a sudden they're just like having some sort of like terrible day, or like they're super escalated, a lot of teachers were like craving the idea of like giving them an opportunity to learn how to handle dysregulated students, because it doesn't come naturally to everyone, right? It genuinely is something that like takes skill and practice, in the sense that it's like it's not just about deep breaths, right? It's really just like, hey buddy, like take a few deep breaths. Like that's not how you regulate someone's nervous system. It's really a lot about like learning how to regulate yours. So it was really interesting that that came up in a video of what do you want out of professional development. It's really a piece of knowledge that like a lot of teachers want, and I think that's such a cool thing to see in education. Because I think when I was a kid, like when I was in middle school and high school, like I I was constantly like anxious, and I think like learning more about what that looks like now, like learning more that like that's how I was when I was a kid, and like being involved in education, right? Like seeing the just like the amount of like stress and pressure I was under as a kid. I think it's nice to see that like that turn is happening in education, because I don't think that my teachers were being trained on like nervous system regulation, like they just weren't. And I think like that's a really interesting thing that teachers want to learn about. So when I posted that video and I saw that, oh my god, yeah, like I want to learn more about this, like teachers do want to learn these things. And I think that like that isn't something that that we understand, because teachers hear the word, and I've said this already, but teachers hear the word like professional development and they automatically like get triggered and they like tense up, right? It doesn't have to be like that. So I think if we ask our district, and we I post videos about it that says like, hey, what do we actually want to learn, I think that's like the perfect place to start, right? So if there's anything to be said about that, like I'm really curious about creating some sort of online program, or like a PDF, or like I said, like I want to go live on here and like create like actual opportunities for people to engage in professional developments in a way that like, hey, you were on my TikTok live for an hour, like here's your certificate, like congrats, like go renew your license. Like I don't know, I feel like that's the kind of stuff that I could do, because I can like speak to a lot of these things, right? Like I can lead a professional development about like nervous system regulation. I can lead one about like how to work with special education students, like I was just talking about not too long ago. So I this is off the rockers. The people listening to this podcast a little bit later are gonna be like, this is all over the place. I don't know, you guys, I'm nervous. This is crazy. So as as we talk about like what professional development looks like and means, I think there's a lot of advocacy that goes into it. And I think like the simple video that I posted is literally just like an example of that, because they're, it doesn't have that, like I said, I didn't like all of a sudden like poll every teacher in the country, but the large majority of them definitely know that they want to learn and they want to do better at things. They just like aren't given the opportunity to do so. And I think that's like the big miss that we have in education in general. It's just like we're not giving teachers enough like opportunities to advocate for themselves in that way. Because I don't know, I also have these conversations like in my school where it's like, okay, like what do we want to talk about? And like people just are pressured by like so many different things all the time. And I think that makes it hard to make PD meaningful. So obviously I'm curious to hear what everyone else thinks about PDs, because I could be, just completely wrong and completely off base with this in general. But, I feel like I have a good understanding of like what PD should look like and what it is. So the other things that like were really interesting to me that came up in that comment section was some other ideas that like teachers really do just like want more, right? And like I said, they got to choose and they kind of get this opportunity. So the other thing that came up is I did a PD not too long ago. I think it was last year, and it really talked about like the science of like ADHD and neurodivergence in general. And that was something that came up in my video too, where it's like I really just want to like sit and learn about ADHD. I want to learn about OCD. I want to learn about autism. I want to learn about all these different sort of like neurodivergences that students walk into the room with, because I think like as we are, and this was a comment that was left in the video too, where we are at a place in society where we have a lot more understanding of like neurodivergence, so a lot more kids are like getting diagnosed, and I think that's super great, like awesome, love that. But I don't think we're giving our teachers enough of an understanding about like what that is and what that looks like. And being neurodivergent myself, I think that there is something there that I can definitely address, right? But it's also about like that's something that like teachers want, is like teachers definitely want what knowledge they can get about that. Like they want a breakdown of like the science of it. They want a breakdown of what ADHD is, what autism is, like what it looks like, how it shows up in the classroom, right? And I think it's not just about like strategies of working with them necessarily, and that's part of it, but it's also just like understanding where it is from and like understanding how far we've come. Because like when I said like I was diagnosed late, like I was 29 I think when I was diagnosed, and the power that it would have given me like as a child to like know that I had those challenges, right? And to have teachers that would understand like how to work with that. I think that is a really good point. So that's something that I want to do in the future. And in the future, like I'm not just gonna like randomly pop up on live all of a sudden, because like I said, this was not something that I put a lot of thought and effort to. I literally just like pushed the button and then I stressed out. So the idea is I really want to create more productive things where like, okay, I'm setting this up, we're going to talk about the science of ADHD for an hour. I do have a really good, I made this for my grad school program. So if this is something you're interested in, please tell me, because I am dying to like present this information to somebody, because it's so super interesting to me. So in my counseling program, we had to do like an advocacy paper about, it was about like special ed in general. And I think I went to my professor and I said, hey girl, like I'm a special education teacher. Like I feel like the baseline of this paper is like not what I need or what I want, and I want to get something out of it. So instead of like, talking to a special education teacher and like walking through the role of a counselor in special education, I went to my professor and I was like, hey girl, can I just like write about something else? Like, can I just do some research and figure out like a new niche to go into? And it was about like neurodivergence, and it was about like identity formation, right? So I eventually stumbled on this idea of, in special education in general, there is an overrepresentation of people of color, students of color. And that kind of started me down this whole path of, cultural competency, which I'll come back to here in a second as well. And it also started me on a path of like identity formation in neurodivergent youth, right? So this idea that I have that is, like I said, if you're interested, please say so, because I would love to give this. So the idea is I'm not, saying that I can talk about all of these things, but this is definitely something that I can talk about. And it's this idea of, hey, if you are in a classroom and you have neurodivergent students, here are some strategies and here are some things to be aware of, right? And it comes through this idea of, we don't necessarily want it to be a label. Like I very much have, thank you so much for liking this so many times. You're my hero. Appreciate that. Thank you so much for being here, you guys. This is really just me yapping about some stuff. It's recorded. If you want to, the links in my bio for this episode, so you can hear all of these rants. The people that are listening to the audio are obviously going to get like a different representation of it, but it is there. Like it's literally, it's there. Yeah, that's crazy. I know. Imagine like over the course of like a few years, just like existing in so many places at the same time. Like that's actually wild. What are the odds? So anyway, there's this professional development that I've been like dying to give, and I think it's like super important in the grand scheme of things, especially as we talk about like that video that teachers are posting all their ideas of like, here are the things that we like want to learn, right? The things that we want to learn about are our students, and this idea that I have for taking a label, right? Like in my example, like taking the label of autism and then like turning it into something that like actually helps a student understand their identity through that, right? And I think it also comes to this place of like cultural competency and even better cultural humility, which I'll talk about in a second. But the idea there is talking about like how can we walk students through, especially like as a teacher, as a case manager, as any of these different things, how can we walk students through the idea of like, hey, yeah, you have ADHD, bud, like that's super tough, and here's what that means, and here's how you can advocate for it, right? So that's an idea that I have that I like want to present on so badly, and I think like as many conferences as I like submit that to, I have gotten a lot of rejections. And at this point, I'm just gonna log on to TikTok and I'm just gonna share the whole PowerPoint with you guys, and then we can go from there, because I think that's just how it has to be. And then if you're here for like an hour, then I'll just mail you a certificate and I'll just say, here you go. Like, thanks so much for showing up. I don't know if it works like that. I tried to look it up in my state, but the idea of doing that, they didn't really give me anything. They were just like, yeah, you need like certain hours. So if you're interested in like hearing about how we can take like labels that kids are given, whether it's like a cultural label or whether it's like a neurodivergent label, like how can we then take those things and then provide it as a strength for a student, or like a confidence for a student, right? And I think that's one of like my most passionate areas, because I think it takes a lot of like my goals in education, and my goal as a teacher is to like advocate for kids like as much as I can. And that's not always easy. So I think like the more tools that we're able to give a teacher or an administrator or a counselor that says like, hey, here's like a direct path you can take that provides opportunities for you to better advocate for your students, and then to help your students like better understand what they are going through. Because I also understand that like even as a kid, the hi, thanks so much for being here, thank you. um I think even as someone who has been late diagnosed, I think it is something that is still a challenge for me to like accept the label. So I think about like what it would have been like for me as a kid if someone were to say like, oh yeah, like you have this thing, and then to like work through it with me, and then to help me understand like what that means. I think that would have been like a huge boost to like everything. So if there's something that I can do for kids that allows them the opportunity to like understand, and like allows me to advocate for them a little bit better, I think that's huge. So if you're interested in that, like please, leave me a message, leave a comment somewhere, and then like I said, I'll actually like, prepare for that a little bit better, and I'll make it like an actual presentation as opposed to just me yapping about all the issues of education, which is basically what my podcast is about. So if you want to, listen along to that and hear my story a little bit more, links in my bio. There's a lot of stuff going on there, you guys. It's super great. The other thing that, and I do, oh, I've talked about this. Okay, so I have a list. I highlighted all this stuff, you guys. I'm getting really official. So the idea of cultural competence came up, right? Like cultural competency in the classroom, and like working with kids who, are not of the majority culture when they come into your building, and they, are often mistreated. They're handled a little bit differently just because the system is problematic. And I have a whole lot of rants about that, and that's also in other episodes. But it is something that I'm interested in, is like, as far as teachers wanting to learn, and as far as like professional development goes, there is a huge push in general, and there always has been, especially recently, to like this idea of cultural competency, right? Like, how as a teacher can I address all the students in my room equitably? And I think the big thing that, and I'm not gonna talk too much about this, because right now, like I said, this is literally just like a trial run. This is me just like ranting about my ideas a little bit. But the thing that really like shifted my perspective on like what cultural like competence is it's talking about the idea of like cultural humility, right? And when we're talking about the big shift that like mattered to me, and I think I worded this better in like a comment on my previous video, where it's like, there are kids that walk into a room that automatically feel like super different just because of like where they come from or the language they speak, and I think that's super shitty. Like, I don't want any kid to ever feel like that. And I think the big shift happened for me when, as a teacher, they like train you on like all this multicultural stuff, and they're just like, hey, like you have to make sure your classroom is a safe space. And I think there was a conversation, you know early on in my career about like, you have that conversation about like, oh, we don't see color, which is complete shit. Like, we shouldn't be doing that. We should be addressing those things as we see them in the classroom, right? So the idea of cultural competence to me was like really scary at the beginning, because it's like, how am I supposed to learn everything about every culture that walks into my room, right? And I'm not necessarily from a very diverse area, so I would say like at school, like, yes, there was like, different cultures and stuff there, but I don't really come from that sort of area. And like the growth that I've made since I was a kid in that realm is just is just insane. And I don't know that I've ever talked about that piece of things, but I've written a lot about it, so maybe someday. But the thing that like really shifted is like, as a teacher early on, I was told that I have to be like culturally competent, like I have to understand all these different things about all these different cultures. And to me, that felt like a little bit insurmountable. And while I tried my best to like, create a space for every student, and in my first role as a teacher, my first job, there was a lot of kids there that like ended up coming to me for all these different things, where it's like, oh, such and such teacher like did this. So I think naturally, like I found a space, and I found, as like students found a safe space in me in this realm, just by surely just like showing up and existing for them. But the shift for me was, instead of cultural competence, like knowing everything about all these different cultures, the really big shift for me was like learning about like cultural humility. And this was something that came from my counseling training. And this is like a newer thing. I want to say like 2018, 2019 is when the first article that we read in class was written about it. And it's not necessarily the idea of like you have to understand everything. I think it's the idea of you have to understand that you don't understand everything. And to me, it's like a weight off my shoulders, right? Because I can welcome a kid into my classroom, and I don't have to understand their whole world, but I have to be willing to listen to their story, and I have to be willing to understand their story. And I also have to be willing to like put any biases that I have like to the side, right? And I think competence versus humility was like a big shift there. So I do have like all these different materials on that, and I do have, experience, creating those safe spaces for those students. So that is obviously also something that like I would love to talk about in a professional development at some point. And like I said, like that previous video that was something that came up, is like people want to learn about that. And I'm like really glad that that shift is happening, because like I said, like that hasn't always been the thing in education. I'm really glad like that kind of stuff is is coming up, because I think our schools and our students need it. And that's something that like I said, I am super passionate about. And I have a lot to say, clearly, because I've been yapping for about 40 minutes already. So congrats on that. The one of the other things, and I think this is like the last one that teachers kind of like talked about, saying that they like want more out of PDs, right? And again, the question for the people that are like coming in still, I think the idea of what PD means and what they want, is a lot of it was like, okay, I want to be able to like manage behaviors, and I want to be able to like manage all these things. And one comment specifically was talking about like the systems, and like, how do I set up systems in my classroom to like make these things okay? And I've talked about it a little bit in the previous conversation that I've been yapping about. But the idea was, creating a safe space culturally, creating a safe space for students with differences, creating a safe space for, dysregulated students. I think like all of that starts with like really good systems. So I think like it's also cool to see that teachers are engaging in the idea of like wanting to understand how to set systems up better. And honestly, for this one, I'm not going to talk super long, because the idea is, I'm trying to put together some ideas about what you guys want to learn about, so that I can create those resources and things, because I think that's like a hole that's kind of missing in teachers on the internet. Teachers on the internet are either like trying to be super funny, or they're going on tour, or they're doing all these other things instead of like providing like resources and stuff based on their expertise, which is like, there's a lot of smart people out there. There's a lot of smart teacher content creators out there. And I feel like the algorithm just like doesn't feed that. So I don't know. I'm trying. It's an uphill battle, but I think like there's a lot of space for teachers to provide their expertise, and I want to like change the paradigm there in a way that like, okay, like here's my idea, here's how we're going to talk about it, here are my resources that I have, and let's get into it. Let's talk. So I think like the end of this conversation is really just about learning how to, as a teacher, advocate for like what you want from your PD, but then also understand like how can we put systems in place that allow these things to happen on a bigger level, right? Like how can we, in my classroom, how can I create a space where like kids are willing to talk to me about what they need on their curriculum? How am I creating systems that like give students a safe space to talk about their, culture and their home life and all these different things? What am I creating in my classroom that allows them to, come into this space to deregulate, to re-regulate, not deregulate, to re-regulate. So I have an old episode of this podcast. I think it's like Circle Time and Restorative Practices, where I yapped on that one. I was a grade A yapper on that one, but the episode was very much about like, okay, how did I create this system in class that allows us to provide students with like a space to share their concerns and allow teachers a space to provide that to them. So there's an episode, I think it's called Circle Time and Restorative Practices, but that is a conversation that I think is a part of like these systems. So if you're one of the teachers that are very interested in like understanding how to create like systems that like make all of these things work, because like I said, I've been yapping for like a minute about just like what teachers want to see, and I haven't really given a lot of like tools and tricks to like get that done. But I think the biggest part is like having that conversation, right? So as I was like reading these comments, and this is something I'm gonna end on, so I'll end here soon, depending on like how it's popping and everything. But the thing I'm like thinking about, and I posted this video just as like a next, like kind of a next step, right? The idea of like, what do you want to learn about like as teachers? And like I said, I'm noodling with this idea of like a live PD, right? Like teachers want time to work in their classrooms, but they also very much like want to be better. Like teachers very much want both of these things, right? So how can we imply and like do both of those things at once, right? And I think like it's easy to say like, oh, let's just like not sit in meetings, and I think that's like impossible because like we have to, but I like the idea of teachers getting to choose and teachers getting to advocate for the things that they want. And I think that's where this idea of like a live PD comes from, right? Not just like live on TikTok, because, eventually I think that could be a really cool opportunity where it's like, I just, like I said, go live for like an hour. You were here for the whole hour. Here's your certificate and here's your, credit to like move up on the pay scale, because that's all that we secretly want. But also, I think my idea of like a live PD would really just be about like, my school has like instructional coaches and like teacher coaches that like, pop in and out of rooms. And I think that's an underutilized position, at least like in my experience, not just at my current school, but just like in general. I feel like that's like an underutilized position that gives us the ability to like really provide teachers with the professional development they want. I was talking earlier about creating time within the school day to like, host a bunch of teachers in your room and like, hey, let's talk about kids. Let's, learn from each other. Let's have some donuts and all of these different things. But I think the learning coach and even other teachers, it does not have to be a learning coach. Like we do not need a specific title for this, right? But it like invite teachers into your room, right? Let's talk about what you want to be better at. Like there's a specific kid I want to talk about. Like, can you watch my interactions with him and then give me some feedback? And can we create more time to like have those discussions with teachers that's not, seventh period when we all have plan? And I think that's like such an impossible thing to put on teachers, because it's going back to like that first point I made however long ago when I started. It's like all teachers want is like more time to talk to teachers and more time to engage in the things that they want, and we're not really necessarily giving that to them. So how can we create it in a way that's like systemic, in a way that like allows teachers to like get it live, right? Like if I popped into a math teacher's room and they were like, hey, can you give me some feedback on this specific lesson, or give me some feedback on like how I'm engaging the student or how I'm regulating the student, right? So the idea there is, when we're you know doing all this, the idea is we really want to make sure those opportunities exist. And I think like professional development, in the way that like I'm talking about here on like this podcast, right, is not necessarily something that you show up for. It's something that you like have to exist like in and out of all your different days, right? Like you have to push it into the system, and I think like that's like the next step, right? And as I think about like all those comments on that video and like what inspired like me to record this episode is the concept of like what do teachers actually want, and teachers like want to talk to each other, and I think like how do we ingrain that in the system in the way that like makes the most sense. So I don't know. I think what where that leaves us is like this is kind of like the end of things that I have for today, and like the end of this episode will be pretty different. Like I said, you can go and listen to this. The links in my bio for like this episode and like all my other episodes. But I like I said, this was kind of just like a trial run for like the live situation. I know it looks like I'm like talking to myself, which like low key I am, but I think it was like a big step in order to say like, okay, here's the process of what I want to eventually do, and it's providing like opportunities for teachers to have a space to like come and exist like in this little space where we can talk more. And my like I said, I just got the ability to like go live because I got the certain amount of followers or whatever to like get the I don't know. It's just like it's all a game, you guys. It's all a pyramid scheme, low key. They're just like egging me on that way. But I wanted to like try it out and see if it was like something that was like actually worth my time. So this is typically how I record podcasts. I just like don't also do it live in front of whoever decides to show up. So the ideas here are basically just like building blocks for what's next. So if you're curious, about the like next steps, like follow along for more. My podcast is available wherever you get your podcasts and all of those certain things. Like I'm really curious about like the next steps here, right? Like I really want to create opportunities for people to like learn in a new way. So that's like kind of it. Like I said, this is just like my trial run for things. So this is where I'll probably end for now because I am tired of talking and I have a lot of pent up energy, and I've been stressed about this for like far too long today. But it feels like a good step, and I feel like I got some stuff out there that I felt like was super important. So if you want to follow along, like I said, please follow along for more, and I will see you in the next one. Gonna stop here, and I'm super proud of you. Thank you so much for being here, and like I said, see you in the next one. See you next time when I am able to like actually exist in a way that like anyway. Bye, see you later. Okay, see you later.